Good afternoon. My name is Shanna Carter, and we're here this afternoon to talk about our interpersonal skills and how to present a positive and professional image in the workplace. Did you know that a recent study between Harvard University and the Stanford Research Institute found that 15% of the reason that you are successful in your career is due to your technical skills, and a whopping 85% of your success, the reason that you are promoted in your position, the reason that you are looked to for value in your position is related directly to your people skills and your interpersonal skills. So what are we talking about when we talk about interpersonal skills? Well, we're talking about our initial engagements. How do we initially walk up and engage with people and introduce ourselves? How do we interact with the people around us? And how do we leave impressions that are positive and professional and lasting? So some of the things that we're going to cover today in this series is when you're interacting in the business world, some things that were really important to remember are our professional presentation and our communication skills and the professionalism that we bring with those. How to create an effective introduction, how to walk up and feel confident when we greet people, when we meet people for the first time. How do we converse with people? What do we talk about? How do we begin a conversation and how do we carry that on and close it? And lastly, how do we leave that powerful impression with people so that it is a lasting positive impression when we see them again, they want to interact with us again in the future? Well, first of all, we need to look at our professionalism. We want to make sure that we always present ourselves in a way that is professional, polished, and poised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what does that mean? That means that not just when we are in the office interacting with our coworkers and the people around us, but when we are outside of the office, when we're on the street, when we are in the elevator, when we see people, even meeting people for the first time, that we're professional and polished at all times. Because you never know who someone is. You never know who that person might be to you next week, next month, or next year. So we always want to leave that impression of professionalism and polish wherever we go. Next is one of the most important things to think about, and one of the most important aspects when we are engaging other people for the first time is the introduction that we make. And so how do we go about creating that effective introduction with the people around us? Well, there are three main steps to introducing yourself effectively. That is, we want to project warmth and confidence. So how do you project warmth? When I say projecting that warmth and confidence, what do you think about when I say that?
Probably smile.
Smile.
Maybe friendly.
Friendly.
Look them in the eyes.
Yes, absolutely. So those are some very important things, that we maintain good posture, that we smile, that we are friendly, and that we're approachable when we interact and engage with people. We want to walk up to them and state our first name and our last name, because this is, again, professionalism. And then one more thing about ourselves. It could be where we work or some other identifying factor about ourselves to help us remember them. And then when the other person has given their name, repeat their name in acknowledgement. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Jones, or it's nice to meet you, Miss Smith. And one thing that does is help us actually remember somebody's names. And a lot of times we say we have a tough time remembering people's names, or you'll see somebody down the road and you're like, I know that face. Where was it that I met that person? And so one way to help us start really remembering people's names is to immediately repeat that name back to them when you meet them. And that's one of those psychological things with people, is that once we start repeating someone's name in conversation, it helps us always remember their name when we see them again in the future. Next is the way that we shake hands. And this is, again, part of that initial interaction and engagement with people. But the way that we shake hands says a lot about us. And people judge us by how we shake hands, how we interact. So I want you to think for just a second about somebody that you have met in your life that left a great impression on you with the way that they shook hands. So think for a second about that person. What was it about them that left a great impression? What was it about their handshake that made you remember it?
I had an old boss, and he had massive hands, but he'd give you he always greet you with a great big handshake. It was nice and firm, and very sincere, and he conveyed that warmth that you were talking about, which was awesome. It just made you feel just great. It's like you love to be in his presence.
Right, absolutely. And so it was warmth, it was friendly. He gave you a nice firm handshake, not too soft, but not bone crushing, looked you in the eyes and made you feel important when he shook your hand. So that's a great example. And a very important part of this introduction process, again, is the way that we shake hands while we are introducing ourselves to people. So there's a 3-step process in this handshaking experience. That is, we want to think about our facial expression, make sure that we are smiling and engaging when we are meeting people for the first time, and when we're talking with them, we shake their hand. Make sure we give them a good, nice, firm handshake, and that we greet that person. So we look them in the eyes, we smile, we give them a firm handshake and a greeting, and that leaves a great impression with people. So once we do that, we're ready to start engaging with people one-on-one. We have confidence in what we're going to say, how we're going to introduce ourselves, what we're going to do once we walk up and start talking to people. So now we're ready to engage them. So here's what you want to do when we're ready to engage people one-on-one. Take the initiative. Don't be afraid to walk up to people. A lot of people wait and they're more comfortable with people coming up and talking to them, but don't be afraid to walk up and stick your hand out and smile. Introduce yourself. Make eye contact with them. And remember your first and last name, something else about yourself as you introduce yourself. Use their name back to them, and so that help you just engage them and remember their name. And then ask a question to start that conversation. So an example of a couple of good questions you could ask to help start a conversation, something like, are you originally from this area? If it's somebody you're just meeting, or tell me what is it that you do with your company, or how long have you been with your company? So just some things like that to help get that conversation started and give you something to talk to instead of, it's nice to meet you, well, it's nice to meet you too. And then we just stand there. So always ask that question at the end to get that conversation kind of up and started and ready to go. Now, we're ready to have this conversation. You've asked your initial question. We're ready to go. We're ready to talk. So some things to think about, some tips on how do we have good conversation skills. What are we going to talk about? Where are we going to get started? Where do we go from there? So the first is to be well informed. And when I say well informed, know what's going on around us so that we have something to talk about. So where do we get our information from? How are we well informed? How do we know what's going on around us?
Watch the news.
You can watch the news.
Pay attention online.
Online.
Newspapers or stuff like that, or like you're saying online news or just
Twitter.
The social gossip. Twitter, yeah, that's
Twitter, absolutely.
Yeah.
So just knowing some current events, knowing some things that are going on in the world around us will always give us something to talk to with people around us. And 2 good phrases that you can use to start a conversation with anyone, anywhere, if you have read some news and know what's going on. 2 things you can use to start a conversation. Did you know, or have you heard? And if you've read your news, you can say, oh, did you know I was reading about this, or have you heard, I saw this on the news today. Have you heard about that, or what did you think about that? And it's a great way just to start a general conversation. We want to stay away from, very controversial topics, but just some general things that are going on in the world around us. And it's a great way to start a conversation with people that you don't know. Next, we want to make sure in our conversation skills that we are focusing on the other person and less on ourselves. And you will find when you are conversing with people that people really do enjoy talking about themselves. And if you learn to ask really good strategic questions, you'll find that sometimes you really don't have to talk that much. You just have to be a good question asker of people and to get them going in conversation. So keep your questions more general instead of asking about, are you married? Do you have children? We don't want to get too targeted and focused in our conversations. But keep your focus more on, tell me about what you do. And that way that opens the door for them to tell you what it is that they want you to know. So tell me about your job, or tell me about where you're from. Tell me about where you went to school. So any of those questions kind of opens the door for them allows them to tell you what they want you to know, and then you can piggyback on that and ask some more questions as they go along. Next, we don't ever want to interrupt someone in conversation, and this includes finishing people's sentences for them. So if you are like me, you're a quick communicator, you're a quick talker, one of the things you're going to have to really watch for is that if you're communicating with someone who is a little bit more strategic in how they converse, and they like to really think about what they say before they put it out there, that we're not trying to finish their sentences for them, that we let them say what they want to say, and that means we have to be a good listener. And so we have to listen to what people say. And one thing we have to really watch for in the listening is that most human beings listen thinking about what it is they want to say next. And so we miss many times the majority of the message. We hear the first little piece or the first part of that message, and we already start thinking in our heads what we're going to say and reply. And so this means we have to slow down sometimes and think about, what is it this person is really trying to tell me? And if I become a good listener and I really hear what the people are saying, it allows me to ask even better questions and be a better conversationalist. And then again, we want to always think about the appropriate topics for conversation. We want to avoid things like politics, there's a lot of things in the news right now, politically charged or religious topics, things like that are the obvious. We want to stay away from topics like that. And then at the end, we always want to close a conversation with people. So when we're finished talking with them, we want to say something like, it's been very nice to meet you. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you today, and I hope we get the chance to talk again sometime soon. And they'll say, it's been nice to meet you too, and you shake hands and you smile and you're on your way. But that's a great way to kind of close that conversation, close that loop, and always leave a really good impression with someone, is to close that conversation at the very end. So in total, when we're talking about really leaving that great lasting impression with people, what we're talking about is remembering what we call the 3 C's in this conversation. Having confidence, again, having that polished professionalism, that's the good posture, the eye contact, communicating well, communicating with the appropriate topics, and knowing what's going on, and knowing how to carry a conversation and talk with people. Secondly is our competence, knowing what we're talking about, having the information, having done our homework, and being a credible source for what we're saying. And the last part is the credibility, being on time, being presentable, and how we carry ourselves, and always keeping true to our word and when we're interacting.